Listeners, welcome to Tales of Abundance. Let's jump right in. Anthony, you got some questions for John about peptides. And John has been doing a lot of deep research and things with his medical practice into peptides. So he's our perfect Dr. John expert here for this. So go ahead.
Well, so, I'm a huge believer in supplements, exercise, good diet, um, and I'm hopeful that, peptides will join the party. Um, but right now, I feel it's more of a bro code in the gyms, and there's very little, at least my knowledge is there's very little um, evidence um, about the efficacy of the various peptides that are out there in terms of the different stacks that people are putting together for longevity versus muscle building versus weight loss and so forth and so on. I mean, we have a lot of history with GLP-1s and diabetes, and now we have a couple of years of GLP-1s having weight loss impacts. But I think I get the sense that we're running 100 miles an hour blindfolded into the peptide world. And I can just see, on Fox and CNN ads for peptides with no clinical support. So I'd love to hear from John. He's got a medical practice that's getting going. I know it's early, but I'd love to hear his take on this.
And I mean, just to be clear, like I'm not a physician, I'm a behavioral health guy. And so my partner is the medical doctor. And we have lots of patients who are using peptides and want to understand what peptides are. And, we talk about kind of a spectrum of, like the way that you treat patients, right? And so on the one hand, you have evidence-based care. Then you have the standard of care is kind of one step down. Then you have things that are like off-label. Then you have kind of anecdotal evidence where a lot of supplements sit. And then you have things that have kind of been debunked medically, right? So that's kind of like the spectrum of things that happen from one side to the other. And you did what a lot of people do, Anthony. You've lumped in kind of GLPs, which are peptides, in with the rest of peptides. And the truth is we have different sets of evidence for GLP-1s than we have for other peptides. GLP-1s have been on the market for a very long time. Go ahead,
Can I
Randy.
interrupt? Are we talking in this conversation? Are we talking about GLP-1s or are we talking about the others like BP
That was
157?
my first question. Yeah, that's my first question because GLP-1s are well studied. They've been FDA approved for a very long time. They're, we're in our second and third kind of generations of the GLP molecules being put in. So, Anthony, are you talking about GLP-1s or are you talking about like the other peptides that are being stacked up and people are taking that kind of describe better what you said was the bro code at the gym?
Well, what I'm saying is, you know, I when I didn't even know that a GLP-1 was a peptide. Okay,
Hmm.
so
Glucagon like peptide.
yeah, I mean, I
Yeah,
learned
yeah.
that a
Fair.
couple of weeks ago. So that's what I'm saying. We're running headlong into an area of supplementation, and I
Yeah,
don't think the bro code guys know that even know they're just hearing letters,
yeah,
LB27, and
sure.
oh, I got to take that for my to build muscle. So I just think we're running headlong into
So,
something that
so the answer
could
to the
be.
question is you're talking about the stack, the B whatever BM whatever it is, 157.
Well, there's
What
lots of
I'm
stacks. Yeah, yeah.
No, what I'm talking about is upper level. I'm talking about doing something medically that's unproven.
Yeah.
This just happens to be the peptide stack is our specific subject matter for the day, but that's what I'm talking about. We're
Yeah, we tell our patients, Anthony, that having kind of agency in their own medical decision making is a really important part of the process. And my pipe dream, and I recognize it's a pipe dream, is that patients have enough information to consume healthcare in the way they're expert at consuming clothing or other services. And so, and that really means being very candid with them about what we know and don't know about whatever it is they're doing for a therapy, whether that therapy is mental health therapy or drug therapy or peptide therapy or supplements or whatever the case may be, giving them really honest information so with their caregiver, they can make the right choices based on their given circumstance. And so like with GLP-1s, we know a lot about how they help with type 2 diabetes. We know something about what they do with cardiovascular disease. We have people wondering more about how they handle some forms of dementia. Alzheimer's in particular is being talked about. I saw an article over the weekend that I didn't dive into in a consumer trade rag about GLPs causing blindness. First time I've heard about that, so I've got to go dive in and see what kind of science is around that. So I think there's lots of like fear mongering in the media and all those things, but the science for GLPs in particular really solid on diabetes, pretty good on cardiovascular disease too, pretty good on weight loss. I think, but longevity, like even though those drugs have been around for a long time, I don't think we have a lot of great longitudinal studies about GLP-1s. And there's a lot of hope that there's some really nice long-term effects. But we had that same hope for metformin only to find out that the studies were flawed. And we can talk about those details later if you're interested. But on the other peptides, I think you've got a series of things, and depending which ones you're talking about, some of them appear to have some good impacts if they're used appropriately, and there is appropriate use and inappropriate use. And the different peptide stacks have different kind of regimens that are kind of recommended. And then there are some, like, we were approached recently by a group of people about, I want to take this particular set of peptides for this particular thing. And the answer is that's not prudent. We don't believe in that. And there's a number of reasons why. In this case, it was about osteoporosis, and, treating osteoporosis with peptides prophylactically was actually, in our mind, contraindicated in our practice for reasons we can get into. So I think it's a little more. It's a little more nuanced than peptides. It's like, what's your situation as a patient? What do we know about these particular peptides? What's the right approach? And how do you get the patient to sit down long enough to understand enough to make a well-educated decision? And part of that's slowing the physician down enough to have the conversation too.
Yeah, usually breakthroughs, right? Medical breakthroughs come from either an accidental discovery or a very controlled approach by a pharmaceutical company that's profit driven. Are
Sure.
peptides generic? And is
Uh,
there money to be made other than, selling the raw material? Does, the big Novartis and these guys, do they
yeah.
have a reason to study this and conjure up a stack that's going to build muscle or, help longevity? How are you approaching that from as a practice? Where are you getting your information besides from your patients?
Yeah, I think right now, I mean, what we're looking is two areas for the scientific information. We read scientific journals on a regular basis inside of our practice, and those scientific journals for us are kind of the medical science and the pharmaceutical science. And then we've got a group of scientists across multiple kind of domains, including pharmacology and in medicine, that we talk to on a regular basis to understand not just kind of the latest, greatest information about the basic sciences of the body, but then also about pharmacology. And so that means we've got to have pretty good networks of people, so we understand not just the published science, but also the science as it's happening.
All
Yeah,
right,
but
we
the
got
question,
Anthony. I'm sorry to cut you
are
off.
these peptides? Hang on. Okay.
We got to move to
We'll,
the next.
we'll have a
Go
whole
ahead.
peptide episode. Let's come back to it for an episode.
We're
Yeah,
way over time. We're
Yeah.
way over
that's
time.
fine.
We
Let's
so
we'll bring a doctor, like a physician, back, and we'll have this conversation again.
yeah. So all right. Well, more questions, listeners. If you have questions, send them in. But the next thing, this kind of builds on last week. We talked about taking the fruit fly brain and uploading it onto a computer and an AI. But this is with humans. And by the way, it was 140,000 neurons there. I looked it up after. It was billions in the human brain that would have to be done. But the human genome has become so cheap. If we go back to 2000, when Craig Venter started this, it cost about $300 million to map the human genome. And Craig Venter, they created an X Prize that the goal was to be able to map the genome in 30 days for $10,000. Well, pretty exciting news. Before they could even get this X Prize launched, it is now down to $100. So their goal was 10,000, and technology has outrun it. So, this opens. What does this do for healthcare? What does this do to insurance? What are your guys' thoughts on this?
I mean, I think it's going to change insurance and criminal investigation probably the fastest because they're going to have the easiest access to data sets. I'm guessing here, by the way, I don't have inside information. So this is just my kind of knee jerk reaction to this. But I think it's going to be insurance for sure because you're going to have people that have far more data they can plug into their system. And then you're going to get, you're going to have all kinds of privacy questions, and how privacy is impacted into kind of criminal investigations is my best guess.
Wow. I didn't think about that one, but so insurance you're saying is going to get cheaper because there'll be early, I mean, I don't know if this is what you said or so, but is it because of early
Oh, I
detection?
don't think it's going to, I think it's going to be impacted the most. I think you're going to see kind of more like risk pricing where there's going to be more variance in pricing based on certain risk factors. And I think there's going to be a lot of arguments about whether or not that's appropriate because, on the one hand, people are going to say it's statistical. And on the other hand, people are going to say, I'm not a statistic. And so I think you're going to see, I think there's going to be some really hot conversations around that.
I don't know. It's interesting. So I have heard that when people get their genome mapped, the number of times that they find some early, like cancer before cancer would have been detectable on a normal test. So early detection is really going to help
Yeah.
longevity in healthcare, I would think. I hadn't really thought about the freedom, the law enforcement. I mean, we're talking Minority Report stuff now. If people
Oh,
remember
yeah.
that movie, it seems like a little bit, but only with healthcare instead of crimes. So, wow. All right. Um, but anyway, I think it's exciting for $100. I mean, and if it's 100 now, it's going to be 10, and then we mix that with AI. Your robot doctor in the future that John's going to warn you against, but I'll do it for him. Don't
I
trust
don't
the
know.
robot.
I think that we're pretty long on the robot doctor. Randy, we're using it. We're using AI a lot in our practice, and what I would tell you is that there are some things that today are still kind of appropriately trial and error on some things, and so if we can get those things tied back to genomes or even other variables that we understand that are non-genetic, environmental, or like it would be amazing to give people a narrower set of things to do to be healthier longer. So I'm actually really, probably surprising to you, I'm actually pro analytics here.
Okay.
Yeah,
Anthony.
is this another aspect of the dissolving of our privacy? I mean, what else is the universe going to know about us that they don't already know? Now they're going to know, that we're precancerous, or and then they're going to have, like John says, have different levels of insurance costs because of yeah, we're hurtling towards the 1984. So interesting.
We might already mostly be there. But anyway, let's just go back to Tales of Abundance. So,
Okay.
Anthony, the next topic, the conversation, I know you've been thinking about this, is will AI take our jobs? I think most people now think, yes, it is going to take a lot of jobs, right? And so now the question being asked is, how does everybody share? How do people survive? So I know you've got some thoughts on this.
Well, we've had this discussion about technology in general, actually, creating more jobs that it took away, despite the fears of people thinking that would happen. Whether it was online shopping and so forth. Amazon created, I don't know how many jobs when they basically, took the bookstores out of put most of them out of business, although many of them are back. But I'm less fearful of that. I think the jobs are going to change. Um, Certainly, things are moving. There was an article this weekend about a plant in South Carolina where they have a robot carrying a 50-pound box of parts, and even though it's still supervised by a human right now, they expect that within a couple of weeks or a couple of months, that human will be eliminated and it'll be unnecessary to do it. So, as things are moving at an unbelievable pace. I mean, literally the speed of light in terms of change that's happening around us. Um, not to tie the two things together or get away from abundance, but even the way we're conducting warfare has changed in the last 12 months. So things are just going 100 miles an hour and more, and I'm not going to even try to guess what's gonna come next. I'll
You know,
react to it when it happens.
I did a bunch of research this morning, Randy, getting ready for this part. And in the early 1800s, 90% of our economy in the US was employed by agriculture. And today it's 1.3 to 1.5%. And there was like a 35-year period where that number, according to AI, jumped pretty dramatically. And we're about 4 or 5 years into this shift. We're going to see the same type of, maybe instead of a 35-year period, it's going to be a 15 or a 20-year period. And I am certain, I shouldn't say I'm certain. I would guess that people in the agricultural days, like there were some people individually that were really hurt by that. But but I think that, for people that are sensitive to it and are going to reskill now, I think they can get ahead of the wave. I think to Anthony's point earlier, there's going to be more jobs. They're not going to be the same jobs. And if you try to do something that was going to cause you middle management, white collar success 15, 20 years ago, you might find that opportunity has dried up today
Yeah,
Yeah,
if
I
you're new
think
to the
I think when
workforce.
you I think when you talk about the move from agriculture to automating agriculture, if you will, and in industry, it was a very precise and specific problem that they wanted to solve. They wanted to get the crops in the ground faster. They wanted to protect them, and they wanted to get them out as quickly as possible into market. It was a very precise and specific thing that was going on. What's happening now is and where I think the magic is going to happen is people are creating things now that never existed before. That they're not so much solving problems, they're creating new industries, they're creating um, support for industries, and I think it's just mind-boggling. I'm glad it's in the hands of people a lot smarter than me. Um, that's why I think good things are going to come out of this in the long run.
I think the difference,
That
John, in my mind, I tend to be very positive, like, okay, all this new tech is going to create abundance and it'll create more jobs. And we could go through example after example
Mhm.
throughout history where it has opened up, whether it was, horse and buggies going away and everybody was worried about those jobs, but the auto industry created 50 or 100 times as many jobs or whatever it is, right? So history is littered with that story. My concern here is how quickly it's happening. Like I feel like what took decades with farming is going to happen in 3 to 5 years with AI. Is that
Yeah, so
that's
I guess the only thing I'd say, Randy, I gotta say we're already 4 years in, so it didn't happen in 3 to 5 years. It's going to take 5 or 10 more years, so it's going to be faster. So I will give you it's going to be faster, but it's already been 3 to 5 years. Like we were already past that point.
yeah.
So I do think that people are well served to be more deliberate than they've been in the past. I think it is going to happen faster. I just think that for the people that are paying attention and that are taking control of their career, it's going to be harder for some people than others. If you're deep into your career, this is a harder deal. If you're early in your career, it's different because you're not going to follow the same footsteps as before. If you're 10 years old right now, probably a little bit easier. But I'm pretty bullish on the future.
It saying it's 40 years, I mean, even saying it's 2 or 3 years, it's just in the last few months that AI has really started taking human jobs. Like that's really been happening in the last quarter or two, at least at any scale, right? And I think, by the way, I've been thinking more about this. If you're the type of person that wants to build things and be creative, there's probably never been a better time with more opportunity. If you're that kid getting out of school and you just want to tinker and create code and create apps and make products, this might be the best opportunity in history. But if you're not that kid and you're getting out of school now, there's just it's going to be rough because not everybody's built to do that, right? Um,
Hmm.
and the other thing I think about, I heard Andrew Yang on a podcast last week again talking about UBI, and all of these politicians, they talk about how they can tax AI, right? They always go to how they can tax it. Well, I think this is a pipe dream. They may want to tax it, but AI doesn't have to stay in the US or any jurisdiction. And AI is already clever enough. If you really push it and it doesn't want to pay taxes, I don't think it's going to pay taxes. Like I think it can move, and there's already technology. Something as old as BitTorrent, right? They could just create different jurisdictions, make it so nobody can tax them if they want to. So just because that politicians want to, it's hard for us humans to move and get away, right? See, and it's not so hard to move from
Yeah.
California to Texas or New York to Florida, but moving to different countries is harder. But for AIs, it's pretty quick and pretty easy.
I had a boss years ago use a very sophisticated theorem when we were working on a business problem. He says, Anthony, you're looking at the whole, not the donut. Okay, very sophisticated. And what I believe here, and I think we're making the mistake, AI is the whole. Okay, it's not the donut. The donut is everything around us, right? The rest of the universe, the rest of technology, the other things that are AI is impacting, along with what other things are impacting those things. It's a multi-layer, or there's probably a better phrase for it. Going back to the farming, it wasn't just the automated planting and the automated harvesting. It was building bigger trucks that could carry more product. It was the elimination of the farmer market and the creation of the supermarket and the staffing of those supermarkets and the stocking of those shelves, and the methodology to get that stuff to market. So the technology was just the whole. The donut was what you did with it once it presented its opportunities to you. And I think we keep talking about AI eliminating jobs. AI is just a tool in the toolkit. It's not everything. So keep take the blinders off and look widely at the situation that you're in versus just saying, oh, AI is going to do the job of a lawyer. It isn't just that. It's a lot more than that. There's still going to be judges. There's still going to be juries. You know, all of that's all. Now, maybe the juries will have access to AI intellect and so on and so forth. But you got to look more broadly at this than just the technology.
All right, that's some Anthony wisdom is a good way to wrap up this abundance briefing. When we come back from the briefing, we are going to be talking about thinking in first principles. John, I'm going to encourage you to we talked about last week your mind shift and changing your belief systems about marketing. I think this could be another step on that, is talking about what are the first principles you want to accomplish, and we'll dig into more of that and even talk about Apollo flights and Wright Brothers and some other interesting stories around it, and then how to use it in your real life. So we will be right back.
Here at Tales of Abundance, we know that fitness is just as important as money or milestones. It's one of our key 5 F's for lots of us. Taking care of my body while I build my life is one of the more time-consuming and difficult goals to chase. That's why we're partnering with AG1. It's a daily drinkable habit. Less than a minute, that's formulated with 75 plus vitamins and nutrients and designed to support energy, digestion, and immune defense. It even has a few grams of protein that we're all chasing these days. And if you want to try it with our affiliate link, you'll also receive a free AG1 flavor sampler, plus vitamin D3 plus K2 with your welcome kit when you first subscribe, a $72 value. Go to shop.drinkag1.com/tales.
Listeners, we are back. I'm excited about this topic. We've been talking about doing this one for a while, talking about first principles and better decision making. And I think most people, they think that they're operating from truth and facts, but they're probably not. Most of us, it's what do we see online? What does our tribe believe? What do the people we work with or the school we go to, our parents, our family? Just all of those different things have a bigger impact on most people's thinking than actually thinking from first principles, right? And when I don't know about you guys, when I think about first principles, a lot of what I think about is like Jeff Bezos, when he built Amazon, the first principles, the question he asked over and over and over again was, does this make the customer experience better? That was his first principle, or like guiding thing. Elon Musk and all of his different stuff, the question he always asks is, does this get us closer to Mars and becoming a multiplanetary species, right? So, like the Apollo 13, John, I know like that, you want to give people just quickly that story and how it applies to first principles?
I mean, so this is the one where you had astronauts who were in space, stuck, had a bunch of problems on the spaceship. Famous movie with Tom Hanks, where the oxygen was being depleted and the carbon dioxide levels were going up, and they had a very little period of time to solve this problem, or they were going to run out of oxygen in the module. And they had, the engineers, I think, started to kind of get talking about philosophy, but they very quickly said, let's just find out what they have in the module and what are the facts of what's going on. And then it became a problem solving solution that was very time constrained. Is that
So
close enough?
what is the first principle they were solving for?
Well, I think in
Right?
this case, they had a couple things they had to do, right? First, they had to keep the astronauts alive. That was an oxygen problem.
Yeah.
Then they had to worry about the systems themselves, the battery levels, and then they had to worry about how they were going to steer the ship back into the atmosphere. So it was really about it was all about one thing: how do I get these astronauts back on to the surface of the Earth safely and alive? And then they had to work backwards through steps like what has to happen first, what has to happen second, because out of order doesn't work.
Right. So, but the first principles is the one you started and ended with, right? Keep them alive and get them back to Earth alive, however you want to frame it, right? And everything
Yeah.
else in the middle are steps or things that happen, but everything references back to how do we get them home alive, right?
Yeah,
So
that's right.
let's talk about what are first principles, because I think, when we were preparing for this, Anthony was talking about this is a tough topic, and I think he's right. So when you guys hear first principles, what do you think?
I think I made a mistake in whatever problem I was solving by not applying it. Um, the race to solve a problem. I think the we don't stop and really think about what we're doing. And Musk uses the example of over automation in his plants. Thinking about automating first versus what his first principle was, which was creating a product um, that consumers wanted and needed, or would get people to Mars. So often in business, especially, we're presented with an issue, and so we rush to the problem solved as opposed to, what am I really here for? Solving the root cause issue so that that problem doesn't reappear.
You have an
Um,
example where you've either done that well or poorly might be more fun in your career?
well, yeah, I mean, lots of times. I mean, could be an HR issue. Someone comes to you with a, I always use this example when someone would resign that I really didn't want to resign. Instead of asking, the obvious, they would always say it's for more money. I would always go back and say, well, wait a minute, what made you start looking? And that is an example of a first principle to help you solve what might be an inherent problem in your business. Why'd you start looking? Yes, you're leaving because you got more money, but why did you start looking? And then that's when you find out, well, my boss was a jerk, or I don't like working in the warehouse, and I don't see growth, or whatever the myriad of reasons could be. And so that's an example where early in my career, I would just throw money at a problem. Oh, okay, I'll give you another $2 an hour, when the real discussion should be about why did you start looking in the first place?
John, what do you think about when you think of first principles?
I mean, look, when I look up definitions of first principles in terms for this, podcast, and the first principles are the things that there's nothing else underpinning underneath them. Like it's the first principle, it's the facts, right? And if you can go deeper, it's not a first principle. So I think having a goal and applying first principles is a thing, but the goal isn't the first principle, right? Unless you're talking about the genesis of your goals, right? So, but it's really I think the first principles is a starting point where you can't work backwards any further. And the purpose of talking about first principles is so that you're actually reacting to the reality of the situation versus something that may not be the case.
Yeah, it's right. Anthony, you've talked about many times the five whys, right? And I think that's kind of a way to get closer
Hmm.
and closer to first principles. And the five whys for people that don't know, I know you had that at your time at Toyota, but you ask, why do you want something? And then when you answer, why do you want that? Why do you want that? Why do you want that? It's really difficult to get five whys
Right.
deep, right? I think usually if you try this at home, you'll probably get 2, 3, 4 deep and run out. It'll probably take you a long time to get five whys, but it's getting down to that core foundational. The example earlier with the Apollo 13. It's The objective is to get them home alive, right? Everything else became secondary to that. And that could be your business. It could be a relationship, right? Like, what do you want in a relationship or anything? So what has to be true? This could be what has to be true because it's the laws of physics. It could be what has to be true because that's your belief system, values, or something else, right? So I think another story that helps explain this, the Cuban Missile Crisis, right? I don't know that, Anthony, you probably lived through this, could probably remember it better, but the Russians were sending missiles to Cuba, right? And Kennedy, what they really wanted Kennedy to do was attack. Like, that's what the army wanted. They were talking about air raids. They had all kinds of different plans and things. But that's not what Kennedy did. Kennedy did a bunch of things. A lot of it was behind closed doors. I mean, there's actually a story where he had a chess player working on this over at a chess tournament, communicating with the Russians behind. But most people, and I think currently our current commander in chief, one of the things he loves to do is be strong. And they, like a lot of politicians, a lot of leaders, they want to show strength when it comes to something like this. And what Kennedy decided that what was most important, first principles, was to avoid war and not have a nuclear war in Cuba. And it was less about being strong. Now, I think he came across as strong, but he didn't get the optics caught up with the outcome.
But that was a how, right? That wasn't the so he was really clear about his goals, and I think that so that, I think that's smart.
Yeah. I mean, Anthony, what do you remember that? I don't know, how old would you have been?
I was about 8. I have some recollection of the days of this occurring, and then obviously, through elementary school and high school, we talked about it a lot. So no expert at all, but there were a lot of side dealing going on, and what people may not realize, we're about 15 or 16 years only away from the last time a nuclear explosion occurred in our universe, and now it's been 80 years since that happened. But it was almost, fate complete. People were preparing to duck under their desks and so on and so forth. There was a real fear that this could occur. And the coolest head in the room was Kennedy, and whatever. And there's a lot of apocryphal stories about letters that went to Khrushchev and side dealings and diplomatic discussions, and each side did not want to look weak in the end. So there was a lot of those machinations that were going on. But in the end, both Khrushchev and Kennedy came out of it looking strong and doing the right thing. So yeah, it was a very, very tense time. Looking back on it, even now, extraordinarily tense because it was real. I mean, there were warheads on those missiles, um, and we were ready to go the other direction. So we were very, very close to a nuclear winter.
That reminds me, Anthony, there's a book that you recommended, you gave to me. In fact, I'm looking at it right now. Possible, right? And that guy,
Yep.
that was a guy that has negotiated several peace deals, right? And all over
Yep.
the world, multiple presidents over decades. And it just makes me think, his first principles when he's negotiating that is always, how do I avoid war? How do I create peace, right? And he had his techniques, build a bridge, and all, his rules.
Is that William Urey? Is that who it is?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
William Urey.
But
His actual first principle would be his first question he would always ask, as the middleman in a negotiation, was, "What is it that you want?"
yeah,
Very simple. What is it that you want? And he gives the example, I think, of a South American uh, president or a senior level person, and he wanted more free time, and he wanted to spend time with his family, and so on and so forth. And okay, well, that's a lot easier to solve than to take over the military. So but that, that was his way of doing things. And I think that is a really fundamental first principle. It applies to what does the consumer want? What do my employees want? What does my wife want? What do my kids want? And then that settles things because that's the John. You mentioned the word truth, and that's really where it begins. What is the truth? And then from there, you're building. You're not,
Yeah.
fixing. You're building from the beginning.
Well, we
Yeah.
don't have conflict on our kind of notes for today, but when I teach conflict resolution and going back to Yuri's thing, that like, first principles, there's only three things that cause conflict in the world. And whether it's, a peace crisis or a marriage crisis or whatever, it's always about values, goals, or style. And sometimes it's a combination of multiple of those things. But like when you're going through conflict resolution, understanding which of those concepts are in play, is it someone's value system, the goals they have, or the style of behavior? Like those are the things that cause conflict. And so when you understand that, it's much easier to get at the root and solve the conflict if it's solvable.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
in,
identifying. The notes talk about identifying the bottleneck. What is the bottleneck to the resolution?
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, with the William Ury, he was dealing with things where, two Middle Eastern countries that were arguing or whatever, right? Like and it was very emotional. But he would get into looking at what the other one wants, trying to get them to be more empathetic, thinking about what the other side wanted and how to deliver it. So I think there's a lot of good lessons in that, in that book. Another quick example from history, the Wright brothers, they were bicycle guys. They weren't the people that were expected to, be the first to flight, right? Like that was not, and a lot of the people that were the so-called experts, they focused on more engine power and trying to, assumptions about lift and takeoff, while the Wright brothers focused on control. They were like, well, we have to be able to control this. So they built a wind tunnel and they tested it, and they went about it a different way because they had different first principles of what they were trying to solve. So let's talk about, where does this show up in life? Like, where is this useful to people? Okay, so hopefully by now people understand what it is, right? But where can you use this?
I mean, to me, Randy, it comes out in conflict, particularly like in middle management situations at work where people don't always understand what's driving their own emotional reaction to something. And so oftentimes, I've asked people like before we, obviously there's the opportunity for an emotional reaction, but can we level set on what the playing field actually is and then react to it? And it's, you can't, when someone's emotional, they're not in the same part of their brain. So it may take a minute to get them out of that emotion and come back to the logic later. It needs to happen. But oftentimes we can get people to kind of broaden the view to see the entire playing field. They're like, oh, and then the emotion is easily, navigated in that circumstance. And sometimes like, gosh, I didn't understand that or didn't know that. So to me, I think just helping people to see the whole playing field before reacting when that's possible, not always possible, when that's possible, can be super helpful. And then the thing I said earlier about understanding the underlying values, goals, and styles, and how that can impact relationships. And those are things that that I deal in every day as I work in the medical practice or as I work as a consultant. So that's just very commonplace conversation.
Anthony, I know you had some thoughts about this when it comes to relationships.
Yeah, and it really doesn't matter if it's personal, marriage, kids, business, or otherwise. I mean, a mental model for me starts with, four or five things. I mentioned the first one, any kind of relationship is foundational. Trust is foundational, right? You cannot get, if you don't have that, the relationship, no matter what, is going to be difficult. Then there's, you know, communication and how you communicate, communicating honestly in a straightforward way, in a respectful manner, understanding, again, what does the person, business across the table from you, what do they really want? Where's the mutual benefit? Munger's incentive alignment foundation and the way he, looked at businesses, show me the incentives and I'll show you the result. What's the mutual benefit? And then it comes, the last couple of things would be like values. Are our values aligned? It's really difficult in a business environment when, you're trying to work with someone whose value set is vastly different than yours. We've all run into that situation to the point sometimes where you just can't work with a person or a business because the values are so misaligned. John and I just went through this last year with a particular situation that we're involved in. And then, and certainly in terms of raising kids or in a marriage, where's the emotional safety? Being very conscious that, the person, you know, it's circular, right? It takes you back to the beginning, back to trust. Are they
Go,
emotionally
go,
safe in this conversation?
go to the raising kids, right? Give me two different examples of different first principles and how you would raise kids.
Oh, we could talk about, the gentle parenting that, the always got to, conflict resolution. The kids got a tantrum.
But what is the first principle that leads to that?
Okay, so the child is having a tantrum. The first principle is understanding that the child does not control their emotions. Okay, so you have to um, understand that part as you try to resolve um, the, the child needing a predictable environment so that they can unwind from this moment of terror that they're laying on the parent. Um, they can't calibrate their behavior. Um,
But
they're
what's the?
they're
I'm going to take you back again. What is the parent's first principle here? What is the parent trying to accomplish?
so what the parent is trying to accomplish is raising a child to be a responsible adult. That's the outcome that you're looking for. So as that child goes through life, they're responsible, they're developing skills, they're going to become a capable adult. And to do that, you've got to provide an environment for them.
To be
You've
fair,
got to
that's
give.
your goal
That
for your kids. I mean, yeah, I mean, I think so. We're conflating a little bit here because there's a first principle, which is what are our goals and outcomes. There's also a first principle, like what is the nature of the thing, like what is the physics, what is the and what you said about kids can't control their emotions. Yes, that's a first principle. There is a goal for the parent, whatever it is. Sometimes it's what you said, which is healthy and functional, but sometimes it's dysfunctional, which is I want to live my dreams through them, and it's unspoken and it's very dysfunctional. I mean, and that happens.
yeah, I
But
think
we're conflating goals and true and facts, right?
I'm just thinking like a real simple thing is one set of parents, their first principle is they want their child to be happy. And a second one wants their child to be rich or play a professional sport so they can live through them, like John said, or whatever else. By the way, it's also very possible that they want them to be rich, but the first principle is because they think that's what's going to make them happy, right? Um, you know, for me, that it would come down to just what is going to make that child happy, and people may disagree on that. But yes, to John's point, I think it's different for every parent, right?
Well, I mean, every parent, the first thing they want today is for their child, at no matter what age they're at, to be safe, right? That's the absolute first principle: safety and maybe security. But the adult world is full of frustration. Uh, Shielding children from that frustration is not preparing them for the next day in their life, whether it's next day or the next decade. So, that's part of the first principle is understanding that there's going to be frustration in this kid's life, and you can't remove all that frustration as a parent.
Yeah. But I think
I think that's the first principle, right? The goal itself is not the first principle.
Yeah.
It's the foundational truth that's the first principle. I think that's important.
I
Well, I mean, just like the business question, the first principle is, what is there a customer for my product? Is the analogous to raising a child that can be a responsible, safe, and productive adult. So that's how I kind of view it. I may have not saying it the right way, but that's kind of the way I view it.
I just think anything that has to be qualified with to me is probably not a first principle because it's not foundational by definition.
Maybe.
And again, we're choosing. I think this is one of the things that we're dealing with in our society right now about communication is when two people don't agree on definitions that are written down in a book, then we're going to have a fight about definitions no matter what we do. At some point, if we're going to communicate well, we need to agree that I don't like 0 is 0, 1 is 1, 2 is 2. If we have to debate all that, then we can't do math problems together yet.
So,
Yeah, I'll give a personal example, and my one of my kids will be bad about this, but the way
Don't
they
tell don't tell us who it is.
I won't, but it's one of them. They're so protective of their child's self-esteem. Like they avoid criticism or negative feedback at every and there's just nothing. And a first principle, they they should be looking at competence. If the kid comes home with a D on their math paper in the third grade, you can't say that, that's okay, we'll do better next time. No, you got to go work on the competence. Okay, get over here, young man or girl. Let's sit down and let's redo all this stuff and put some structure around it. And it's okay that child knows that they're wrong, and and push through it. This constant avoidance of conflict and negotiating conflict with kids. I mean, it just absolutely drives me crazy to watch it, because I don't think, you know, constant reasoning with a 6-year-old or an 8-year-old is going to work. I mean, yes, there are times where it's appropriate, but it's not every single time, and that's kind of what I see in some of the dealings with some of my grandkids.
I think this is a big issue um, in society, right? I mean, almost every political disagreement, big part of it has to do with both parties not understanding the other person's first principles. And a great example is we have a family friend, um, fantastic lady, but we had her over for Christmas. Well, many years we had her over for Christmas. Her and I debate like crazy. We don't agree on. I've literally never met anybody that I disagree with on that big of a percentage of things, and yet we get along great because we both know that what the other person's intention is. For example, with education, right? I mean, her theory her thing is like we just got to spend more. We got to pay teachers more. We got to spend more money, spend more money, spend more money. And I think that we have to change the system, improve the system, et cetera. I don't want to turn this into that debate, but we can debate this like cats and dogs, and we walk away perfectly fine, and neither one of us gets our feelings hurt, because I know that her first principle when it comes to this is she wants better education for the kids. And that's the same thing that I have. We have two different paths to get there, but we have the same exact outcome. Even though we disagree on almost every topic, we do agree on the outcome on pretty much every topic.
But Randy, I think the idea of first principles is they're inarguable. Like I think maybe we call that something different, like what you value versus what she values. But if you can argue something, and there's something underneath that argument, you're now not talking about a first principle.
Well,
And so I just want to be careful that we're not leading people down the wrong path.
I think you and I see this very differently. I mean, what is
Well,
inarguable?
but again,
Hold on, what is inarguable?
I think that in the moment, like there's theorems in math that are inarguable until they're disproven. There's science that is inarguable until the next thing is proven along the way with where it goes. But you can't. I'm trying to think of one that was inarguable that got changed. But like there was a number of scientific kingdoms in biology when I was in school that's been updated since then. But you couldn't when I was in high school, you couldn't just say, well, I disagree with that number of kingdoms. It was like that was the definition foundationally until someone came through and said, we're going to reorganize this, and here's how we're going to, and here's why, and here's the science. And so I think that this is a part of where I think we get sideways in communicating, is that like there's base definitions, and just because someone doesn't like them doesn't give them permission to change them without ruining the ability to communicate.
So I would say we think the definition is almost exactly opposite of each other. I think that having that is the opposite of first principles. If you really believe, like, okay, here's the science, you're not going to be capable of thinking in first principles. It's, you know, it's the opposite. If we go back to Jeff Bezos, his first principle of, is this going to make the customer experience better, right? And you know, we opened with Elon Musk. Is this going to get us closer to Mars? That's their.
But those aren't first principles. Those are I don't think so. I think those are their goals, and I think those two things are conflated. And I think that's where we're going to send people down the wrong track. So if just Google first principles and find out what Wikipedia says, or the definition, or any dictionary says about what first principles are. But if we tell somebody,
Go back to back to the Apollo example. The first principle became getting them back alive.
but I think the first principles were, as I'm reading through this right now, I'm trying to fact check our work here, right? First principles are, this is what we have in the pod. Like, those are first principles. Nothing's going to change those things. We have this size filter, this much duct tape, this much tubing, this much whatever. Like, those were the first principles.
I would consider those facts or perception of fact. I would not consider those first principles at all.
Well, I'm just reading definitions here. So, fundamental truths like the building blocks, such as what raw materials are used or what scientific laws apply, versus looking at the assembled component, challenging an assumption, right? And so the first basis from which something is known, from the Oxford Dictionary, the fundamental concepts or assumptions on which a theory, system, or method is based. And so I don't think it's the goal itself. I think it's the fundamental information upon which something is. And this is important because when we don't have the same definitions of words we're using when we communicate, this is how people get crossways in the communication and inadvertently talk past each other. So I'm not trying to be pedantic.
Well,
Yeah,
can I ask John, because I'm getting sideways here a little bit,
Yeah,
and I'm looking up some definitions too, along with you.
yeah.
Isn't the you use the term conflating the first principles with the goal, but the first principles are contextual to the situation. So this simple example that came up when I talked to my buddy, instead of asking how a rocket's usually built, the first principle thinking asks, what must a rocket fundamentally do? So it's contextual, right?
Mhm.
It's a goal, right? To get the rocket to do what it needs to do, but no, asking how rockets are built is not a first principle. So it's contextual. So it's just raising kids. The first question that you'd ask about raising kids would be different than if you were trying to, make an AI chip, 3 times more powerful. So I
But I would
guess
say
it's
it's
hard.
always fundamental. But the idea of a first principle is you can't go beneath it. And so if you guys are arguing about, if someone's arguing about one versus the other and there's a layer underneath it, then I think you're by definition not talking about first principles.
I
And this
agree.
is the whole my
I
truth versus your truth.
yeah. I see where you're coming from. It's hard to, um, in my mind,
Let
it's
me
hard
say it.
to
I'm going to say
distinguish.
it differently. I think
Okay.
we need to separate facts from perspectives.
Oh boy,
Like I think this is where we get really problematic.
we're opening such a can of worms now, right? The problem with facts.
I didn't pick the topic today.
Well, there's again, comes back to, I've said this ad nauseum, so I apologize to the listeners, but 99.9% of science over time has been proven wrong, and they were all considered facts,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
And most of what we know now is going to be proven wrong at some point. And so, if you look at the people that really make breakthroughs, they take the assumptions and they throw them out, and a lot of times they go to first principles, right? I mean, when going back to Elon, but talk about going to Mars. When he started, everybody told him it was impossible. Like
Yeah,
the
sure.
U.S., China, Japan, India, Russia, all these countries have a 50-year head start or whatever they had. They have trillions of dollars to throw at the problem, how the hell are you going to start out with $100 million or $200 million or whatever they started and beat them? And within a few years, he did, because he took all their assumptions. He studied all the things that they took as fact. Like, he went really deep and learned, but he took a lot of
Well,
their
you
assumptions and threw them out the window and started over. Like, he started with, we have to have a reusable rocket to get the price down.
but pause. You just talked in a big circle, Randy. So you just went from science to facts to assumptions, and you just interchangeably used all three of those words to make your point. And so there's a whole bunch of logical misses in what you just said. So like let's slow it down for a minute. And like if two people are going to have a conversation about a theorem about math, and the point of the conversation is to challenge that theorem and advance it and move it forward, hyper-functional for sure. But if we're both going to have a conversation about moving that forward, and we've agreed that we're not going to challenge that theorem, things can't be in flux all the time. Like at some point, you have to agree what the words mean that you're talking about. Like the sun means something.
Understood, but the first principle, like, he started out with going to Mars, and then like the next layer was
Yeah, that was the goal.
we have to have reusable rockets. Was the next thing, even though all the facts said nobody can do this and you're not going to be able to do it. That's what all the facts said, and all the experts told him.
But that's the point of first. Yeah, I agree that you're using first principles by breaking down the assumptions into the core. You're going to rebuild something better. I think that's a very common use of the term. But I think that the first principle itself, all the way at the very bottom, is the foundational thing that's generally considered inarguable. And so in this case, I would say the cost of aluminum, for example, was inarguable. But it was arguable about maybe what materials you could use for a rocket. Maybe. I don't know much about this one. You're going to know more about this than when it comes to Elon Musk's building rockets. But
the amount
Elon
of
said,
aluminum. Go ahead, Anthony.
no, well, and I think it's on the subject. He said something, and I'll paraphrase it, that there is no bigger waste than optimizing for something you don't need. So what he's saying there is, which is part of the definition of practical definition of first principles, is you need to strip away assumptions and
yeah,
conventions to get to the bottom line truth. And I'll give marketing a marketing example of what John and I discovered early on in our journey. In one of our businesses, we found that the people that were providing services relative to direct mail were mailing tens of thousands of letters to people who had not responded for 5 years. And when we pointed it out to the provider, we said, "You stop sending over there." And they said, "No, we can't do that." And we said, "Why not?" And they said to us, "You never know." Okay. And John and I said, "No, we do know, because you've been doing it for 5 years and we've never seen a response from you." So that's our version of getting rid of, you know, optimizing the aluminum that you don't need the aluminum in the first place. And so it got us to a first principle of, if we're going to do this task of mailing to people, we want to mail to people who are going to respond to us. That was our first principle. We didn't know it at the time that it was a first principle. It just seemed logical to us. But now that we're older and wiser, we can take credit for it. And that's why I said earlier today, this is a tough subject, because you never know when you're in. I mean, you don't always know you're battling to a first principle because you're solving a problem. We were solving a problem with direct mail. We didn't realize that we had to go back to the first principle of, we want people to that meant we wanted people to respond to us. So
but I think there's a
it's
there's a difference between someone that's made an assumption just based on an assumption versus someone who's made an assumption based on I've seen something a bunch of times versus someone who's scientifically kind of proven things to the extent that you can with the scientific method versus a group of skilled experts who've said, hey, this is for now the definition that we're going to use because it's the limit of our understanding.
yeah.
And those are four different levels of of acceptance, right? And so, and again, all of them, there's an appropriate time for all of them to be challenged. But the because I said so reason, like that's where I just kind of like
but
it's
then
really hard to
again,
have a conversation with somebody.
but the first principles is taking these things that are assumed to be the bedrock and questioning them and going below them, right?
Yeah,
Like your aluminum thing,
Yes.
you're that's not a first principles. The first principles has to be, okay, what are we using the
No.
aluminum for? Is it the best material? What would be the
yeah,
best material? What are we trying to accomplish? It's more questions like that. Like, should we even be using aluminum? Should we be sourcing aluminum a different way? You know,
yeah,
since you were talking about Elon at that point in rockets, I'm going to switch it to his other company with Tesla. But every car company in the world, every one of them, buys and they put hundreds or thousands of pieces together for a frame for a car. Not that guy. That guy went to first principles. He, at the beginning of their assembly line, the first step is a smelter, and it's a big warehouse full of aluminum. Aluminum cans, aluminum hubcaps, etc. They put it in the smelter, and that thing comes out in a form. The body is one piece, right? Instead of, I think
yeah.
it's 3,000 that's in an average car or something. I forget the number, and you have to fact check me on the 3,000. But theirs, like, he has to, this is how everybody does it. This is the facts in the industry. And he's like, no, I'm going to do it this way because there's less that could go wrong. It'll be cheaper in the long run. It'll be better for customer service, you know, whatever, right? So,
Right.
I mean, it's like, I think it's okay. We clearly don't agree even on what the definition of this is, which is okay. I think that's healthy.
I, man, I think people could get very frustrated here if they don't stop for a second. You whatever your smelter example is, it sounds great, but I'll guarantee you that before that occurred, something else was going on. So you have to iterate your first principle to get it right. And you touched on the five whys, the Toyota production system five whys a while ago. And it'd be wise for anyone trying to determine what their first principles are is to make sure you get through the five whys. Why is this my first principle? Why, you know what I mean? And really drill down. I don't think it's easy to get to first principles. I think it's brutally hard. It's intellectually difficult. You've got to, we talk about strip away conventions and assumptions. That's probably the hardest thing in the world for a human being to do is to rip
Well, I
away
think,
assumptions so simply. Oh, I'm just going to forget that something I've believed for the last 20 years. That's really freaking hard. So
well,
it's
and
not an
there's
easy
some
task.
things like I think there's also a level of like, you know, you can get to the why, but like for me, getting into the why in a situation that I can't go like I'm not me personally, I'm not going to get into like uh, you know any kind of like you know atomic level computing or things that I have like that are scientifically still big questions. Like there's no benefit to me doing that because I like those facts don't change my day to day. Really, for me, the idea of first principles is getting down to like what's factually inarguable for this situation so that we can react to it with what the facts on the ground are. But like I had this happen all the time. Someone's like, "But what if the sun doesn't come up tomorrow?" Any version of that, I'm pretty allergic to because it's not actually moving the conversation
But
forward.
John,
Right.
I've worked with you enough, and you're really good at this actually, that you will ask people like, okay, what are you trying to accomplish? What's the objective of, like just asking something as simple as what's the objective of the business? See, I think it has, like, that is getting to first principles, right? You've asked me that question, right? Is it to build this? Is it to build this business, own it forever? Is it to build this business and sell it? Is it for it to become a cash machine? Like, that's getting to a first principles. Why was this business started, right?
Yep.
So okay, we're going to use my definition I apologize, John, but I'm
See, I
asking.
love that. No, I love that because now you have a conversation. You're like, hey, for this conversation, here's the definition. Boom.
Right.
Like, I think that is super helpful.
But mostly I'm asking the question, so I'm going to make it mine, yes. But anyway, all right, being a smartass. So
It's
back
fine.
to
I'm good with it. I
your,
like it.
back to your, we had a conversation last week, and you opened up about your challenge with your beliefs about marketing. I think it's really helpful if we tie that back in here using my definition. In other words, what is it you're trying to accomplish? What is the real goal with marketing?
Yeah.
I think it's a really good question. Do you know the answer?
Yeah. So there's two. I mean, I have not considered it enough to be definitive about it, but here's what I would tell you. I think there's, on the one hand, I've got things that I want to accomplish in the world. I've got this answer for how we fix type 2 diabetes in very difficult populations, and I want to make sure that we don't keep that a secret. Like, I want everyone to know so we can really impact people's lives in a great way. That's on the one hand.
Can I ask you a
On the
follow-up?
other hand,
Can I, you
oh,
want
sure. Do you
people
want,
to know? Is that what you want? Is just for them to know?
well, no, I want to fix the problem globally. Like, for sure, I want it. Yeah, and but that's not just a marketing question. So I was like, the marketing question is about awareness,
But
interest, desire, and then
but your
taking action to
outcome,
engage in the process.
the reason you want to market is you want to fix the problem. You want to
That's
cure
right.
you want to treat the diabetes problem. Okay?
Yeah, I think we can end type 2 diabetes across the globe.
Okay. Love that. Love it. Okay. So what's the second thing you said?
Well, then the second thing is, like, so there's a blocker for that inside my brain somewhere that needs to get fixed, and so the a kind of a on the way to that path, there's a belief system that I've got. I think that I have to rewire inside my brain, and I don't fully have my arms wrapped around that yet. But I do believe that I'm getting in the way of that because of something I believe that is today subconscious, but I will hope rise to the level of consciousness and fixing very shortly.
I would, I guess, label that as an abundance blocker. I don't know if that's even a real clinical term or whatever, but I would label the second thing. The first one I think is an amazing first principle, right? Like, I want to cure type 2 diabetes in the world. Like, that's the reason for marketing. Like, the reason for
Yep.
marketing isn't to change the belief system. Like, you have to change the belief system to solve the problem, yes. But the real core is, in my mind, and I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but that seems really clear, really impactful, really amazing, right? I want to solve type 2 diabetes in the world. That's why I market.
Well, I mean, to be even more clear, like, I feel like that's a calling that I have that goes back to my kind of spirit. So that's not the first principle. The first principle is even deeper, kind of at a spiritual level. So, but
Okay.
that's a broader topic.
Better yet, right? So to me, again, with that's where it goes, and then that, I think, knowing that will make it easier for you to solve it. And you asked the question last week, why can't I, bring on 1 million new people and not piss off any of them, or piss nobody off? And so I think that if you go back to first principles, it's like, what's more important, not pissing people off or bringing on 1 million new clients?
Yeah, I mean, your comment about that actually was pretty helpful, and I think I'm now past the point of, like, hey, if somebody reacts poorly based on their stuff, I can't control that, and so I think I'm past that point.
Okay, it's great. So anyway, all right,
Yeah.
Anthony, what
So
do you got?
so let's move the conversation to the next level. So we've talked about what it is, right? We've talked about what first principles are. We've talked about how you go about working on it, and I think everyone should understand that it's an iteration, and you may not get it right the first time. And ask the five whys in terms of getting to your first principle for whatever it is that you're working on. But why do it? Why do it? What I think is the why is doing this well and having a constant focus on it gives you confidence in what you're doing. It will feed on itself. You're on a path that makes sense for the circumstance that you're in. So when you take an action, now you're solving a problem with the foundation of your first principle. You're going to feel good about that tactic. You're going to feel good about that action that you're taking because it's based on a first principle. So I think it's really important that people understand that that's what's creating abundance, right? That's what this is all about. How do you create abundance? By having a foundation that really is solid, that gives you confidence in the things that you're going to take forward. So I
Yeah,
think that's really important in it.
Anthony, I think about that like exercise. You've said your reason for exercising before is like so you can play with your grandkids, right? And be,
Yep.
be healthy, active, live a long life, spend more time with family. We had Dr. Jeffrey Gladden on last week, and he talked about making 100 the new 30. I think that whether it's having a long life, spending time with your grandkids, making 100 the new 30, I don't care what the goal is. But if you take whichever one of those, that is going to keep you going to the gym and working out more than just going, well, I think some people, New Year's resolution comes along and they say, I'm going to the gym 3 times a week. Okay, great. We all agree that's
Yep.
good for you. But if you're not focused on a first principles or a reason, an underlying motivator, you're just unlikely to follow through, right? If your why,
Right.
I guess another way to put it, if your why is big enough, everything else becomes easy. So,
Yeah. And I think in real life, it's very, as I said earlier, it's very difficult to constantly be thinking about first principles when you're trying to just survive. You know, you know, um, a 20 something kid out of college who suddenly is, you know, um, sending out 1,700 resumes and getting no response. It's a tough environment. It's like, what's my first principle? You know, get, bring that person back to that first principle. So, not easy to do, but you got to know why, and you got to have confidence in what you're doing. You know, we've often said, I certainly have, is sometimes you make a mistake, but you work so damn hard anyway that you minimize the mistake and still come out on a good end of things, not an optimal end of things necessarily, but a good end of things. So um, it's not a perfect journey. It's not as simple as reading a book and writing it down and journaling and all that. It's a lot of iteration.
all right. I just think a lot of breakthroughs are coming based on getting to first principles, right? And this is one of the big abundance blockers that's out there is that people have assumptions, and if they're because they live in those assumptions or they're not thinking about it deep enough and what the real reason is, why do you have the business? Why do you have the marriage? What do you want to accomplish with your kids? Whatever it is. Why do you go to the gym? I think all of those things is the other side of them, I think, is where there's a lot of the breakthroughs. So, gentlemen, I enjoyed it. I especially like that we disagreed a little bit. And listeners, as always, download, subscribe, tell your friends, tell your neighbors, and keep coming back. We'll be here again next week. Thank you, gentlemen. Listen and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. Click follow for more content like this, or go to talesofabundance.com to join our community and get free tools.